The wind had already turned bitter when Elias Turner rode down from the high ridge that overlooked the scattered cabins of Willow Creek. The land stretched wide and lonely in all directions, a sweep of grass and stone where the horizon seemed endless, broken only by a weather-beaten church steeple and a few smoke threads rising from chimneys. It was early autumn, the season when nights bit hard and unprepared folk sometimes didn't wake by morning. Elias was a man known in those parts, though not well known in the way of company. Folks nodded when he came through town, but few pressed him for words. He kept mostly to himself, carrying the quiet weight of someone who had lived too many years in the saddle and too few in a warm house. There was silver creeping into his beard now, and though his shoulders were broad, his eyes carried that tired cast of a man who had buried both dreams and kin along the trail. He had business that day, nothing more than delivering a small bundle of hides to the general store. He meant to be back out on the ridge before nightfall, but the hand of Providence, or misfortune, he never could tell which, often turned a man's course in the west without warning. It happened as he was tying his horse outside the store. A voice cut through the dusk air, sharp with desperation, though quiet, almost strangled. "Mister? Please, sir, don't turn away." Elias turned his head and saw her. She stood a little apart from the boardwalk, as though uncertain whether she had the right to speak at all. Her dress was worn near to threads, patched and faded. She couldn't have been more than 20, yet her face bore the look of someone who had seen too much winter already. The girl clutched her shawl tight, her knuckles pale in the fading light. At first he thought she might be begging coin, as many widows and orphans did, but there was something in her eyes that stopped him cold. Not hunger, not even shame, though both were there, but a kind of raw fear, as if the very ground beneath her had given way. "What is it?" Elias asked, his voice low, carrying the gravel of years. Her lips trembled before the words came. "If I don't find shelter tonight, I'll freeze. My sister's gone sick. I can't do it alone anymore." Elias shifted, unease prickling under his coat. He was no stranger to sorrow, but neither was he accustomed to stepping into it when it wasn't his to bear. Still, the girl's words gnawed at him. Out here, the line between life and death was thinner than a strand of hair. "I don't keep a house in town," he said carefully. "Best you ask at the parsonage. Reverend Hale takes in folk when he can." The girl shook her head, her braid slipping loose over her shoulder. "I did. His wife's turned sick herself. He can't take on more. They sent me away." Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed a hand hard against her mouth. Something in Elias, some old wound not yet scarred over, stirred at that sound. He remembered another winter, another voice asking him not to leave. He swallowed against the memory. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara," she whispered. Clara Bennett. The name meant nothing to him, yet the way she said it, as if offering her whole self with that single word, rooted deep. "Where's your people?" he asked. Her gaze dropped. "Buried on the North Hill. All but my sister." Silence fell heavy between them. Elias let out a long breath, his hand tightening on the reins. He knew then he couldn't walk away, though the thought of letting her into his life filled him with a restless unease. "I've a place out past Miller's Creek," he said finally. "It ain't much, but it's warm. I can put you up for the night, just till you find something better." Clara's eyes filled, though she fought to keep steady. Thank you, sir. Truly." She followed him to his horse, moving with a stiffness that spoke of exhaustion. They rode in silence beneath the bruised sky, the prairie stretching out like an ocean of shadows. By the time they reached his cabin, the lantern light inside glowed against the dark, a single beacon on the lonely expanse. Elias pushed the door open, letting the warmth from the small hearth spill out. Clara stepped inside, her hands trembling as she drew the shawl tighter. He set about stoking the fire, saying little. He had lived too many years alone to know what words were proper. After a time, she broke the silence. "It's just me and my sister, Hannah. She's 14. She's not herself these days. Fever took hold and I can't get her to eat. I thought if I could find work or some place, but nobody will hire a girl who can't promise she's alone." Elias listened, his jaw tight. He had heard stories like this before. Young women left to fend against a world that cared little whether they rose or fell. Yet to have her sitting, here in his cabin, her voice raw with strain, it cut deeper than he expected. He handed her a plate of bread and beans. "Eat," he said. She nodded, tears glistening though she tried to hide them, and ate with the quickness of someone who hadn't had enough in days. The night grew late. Elias showed her to the small cot by the fire, laying an extra quilt across it. He meant to take the bed himself, though it had been years since anyone else had shared that roof. But when he turned to leave her to rest, she rose suddenly, clutching his sleeve. Her eyes were wide, shining with a terror that seemed to rise from her very bones. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't leave me alone. Not tonight. Her throat caught and she forced the words out. "If I sleep by myself, I'll die. I can feel it. The cold, the fear. It'll—" "Take me!" Elias froze, every muscle stiff. Her hand was small against his sleeve, but the desperation in her grip was strong as iron. "I'll keep the fire high," he said quietly. "You'll be safe here." She shook her head, trembling. "Please, I beg you." Her voice cracked. "Barely more than a child's plea. Let me stay near you, just for tonight. I can't bear the dark alone." The room seemed to hold its breath. Elias felt the weight of her words press hard against the walls he had built inside himself. He had sworn never again to let another soul close enough to break him. And yet here she was, eyes wide and pleading, her whole life hanging on the thread of his answer. Outside, the wind howled against the eaves, rattling the shutters. The prairie night had grown sharp with frost. Elias stood there, torn between the promise he had made to himself and the sight of the girl whose very breath seemed to depend on him. At last, he drew a slow breath. "You don't know what you're asking," he said, his voice hoarse. "I know only that I won't survive." "If you turn me away," Clara whispered, "please, mister, I'll die." Elias's heart pounded. He had faced storms, wolves, and men with guns in their hands, but he had never felt so cornered as he did in that moment. And it was then, as he wrestled with his own resolve, that the sound came, faint but sharp through the night. A knock, 3 hard raps against the door. Clara went white, her hand clenching tighter on his sleeve. "Don't answer," she whispered, fear flooding her voice. Elias turned toward the door, his hand already reaching for the rifle by the hearth. Whoever had come through that darkness knew where he lived, and they had chosen a strange hour to call. The fire popped, shadows dancing across the walls. Clara pressed close to him, her breath trembling. The knock came again, harder this time, and Elias, heart steady now, raised the rifle and stepped toward the door, knowing well that nothing in his quiet life would ever be the same after this night. The butt of Elias Turner's rifle pressed cold against his shoulder as he inched toward the door. Outside, the knocking had ceased, replaced by silence so deep he could hear Clara's ragged breathing behind him. The fire's glow stretched shadows long and thin across the floorboards, and in the stillness, Elias felt every hair on the back of his neck rise. He spoke low, his voice carrying the calm steadiness that came from years on the frontier. "Who's there?" For a long moment, nothing. Then a man's voice, hoarse, edged with something unfriendly, slid through the cracks of the door. "Open up, Cowboy. We've business." Clara gasped and pressed closer to Elias's back. He felt her fingers dig into his coat, the tremor of her body almost matching the flicker of the firelight. He didn't turn to look at her, but her fear was enough to answer the question already forming in his mind. Whoever stood outside wasn't a stranger to her. Elias didn't lower the rifle. "This ain't a saloon," he said firmly, "and I ain't in the habit of opening my door to shadows in the night." The voice outside gave a dry chuckle. "You got a girl in there, Turner. Don't play dumb. We just want what's ours." Elias's jaw set tight. He had no notion how they knew his name, or how they knew Clara was inside. His eyes flicked toward her for the first time, and she shook her head frantically, her lips forming a silent plea. "Don't let them in." The man outside struck the door hard with his fist. The wood shuddered against the frame. "You hear me? That girl belongs to us. Step aside, and no harm comes to you." Clara's breath hitched and tears welled in her eyes. She clutched Elias's arm with both hands now, her strength surprising in its desperation. Elias held her gaze for a heartbeat. What he saw there, a mix of terror and a trust she was scarcely able to grant, made his choice clear. He raised his voice, steady and deep. "She ain't yours, and she ain't leaving this cabin tonight. Best you ride on." For a moment, only the whistle of the wind filled the silence. Then, footsteps crunched in the dirt outside, retreating a few paces. Elias eased his finger. Along the trigger, ready. The voice came again, colder this time. "Have it your way, Turner. We'll be back come morning light. And you best pray your aim is truer than ours." Hoofbeats pounded the ground, fading into the distance. Clara slumped against Elias, sobbing silently into his coat. He let out a slow breath and lowered the rifle, though the tension in his body remained tight as a coiled rope. He guided her, gently to the cot by the fire. "They won't quit," she whispered through her tears. "Not until they have me." Elias crouched beside her, studying her pale face in the firelight. "Who are they?" Her hands twisted in her lap, knuckles white. For a long time she didn't answer, as though saying the names might summon the men back. Finally, in a voice barely more than a whisper, she said, "The Maddox brothers." Elias felt the name strike like a hammer. He'd heard it before. The Maddox clan had a reputation stretched across 3 counties, ranch hands turned drifters, known for running whiskey, rustling cattle, and worse. Most men avoided them altogether. Those who didn't often regretted it. "They say I owe them," Clara said, her voice breaking. "But it isn't true. After Pa died, they came sniffing around, offered me protection, said they'd keep Hannah and me safe if I promised myself to them. I refused. Since then, they've followed me, hounded me. They want me like a piece of property, and there's no law out here to stop them." Her words poured out now, heavy and quick, as if keeping them inside any longer might crush her. Elias listened in silence, his face darkening like storm clouds over the prairie. He had seen enough of men like the Maddox brothers to know what they were capable of. "You're under my roof now," he said quietly. "And while you are, they won't lay a hand on you." Clara lifted her tear-streaked face to him, her eyes wide. "You don't understand. They'll come with guns. They'll kill you for standing in their way." Elias stood, his figure tall against the fire's glow. "I've faced men with guns before," he said, and though he spoke with calm certainty, a part of him knew this was more than just a fight with outlaws. It was the stirring of something deeper inside him, something he thought long buried. The hours crept by slowly. Clara finally fell into a restless sleep on the cot, though her body twitched with every groan of the wind outside. Elias sat near the fire, rifle across his knees, staring into the flames. His thoughts turned inward, back, to the wife he had buried 5 winters past, and the daughter who had followed her into the ground. He had sworn then that he would never open his heart to another soul, that the pain of loss was too sharp to survive twice. Yet now, with Clara and her sick sister depending on him, he felt that vow bending. He could not turn her out, not when the shadows at his door meant to destroy her. By dawn, Elias's decision was clear. He brewed a pot of coffee. It smelled sharp and bitter in the cabin. Clara stirred awake, her eyes swollen from the night's tears. "They'll be back soon," she whispered. Elias nodded. "Then we'll be ready." He saddled his horse, then set about checking his small stock of ammunition. Clara hovered close, wringing her hands. When he handed her a pistol, she shook her head. I've never fired one," she stammered. "Then it's time you learned," Elias said simply. He led her outside, where the pale morning sun cast long shadows over the frost-hardened ground. He showed her how to hold the pistol, how to steady her breath, how to squeeze instead of jerk. Her hands trembled, but there was determination in her eyes as she fired at a stump, the shot ringing sharp across the empty plain. That's enough, Elias said gently, taking the pistol back. If it comes to it, stay behind me. But don't be afraid to fight for your life. Clara nodded, her face pale but resolute. They returned to the cabin, waiting. The silence of the prairie stretched thin, each moment drawn tight with anticipation. Clara sat close to the fire, her shawl pulled tight around her, while Elias stood near the window, rifle in hand. It was near mid-morning when the riders appeared. On the horizon, 3 of them, their shapes dark against the brightening sky. As they drew nearer, Elias could make out their broad hats and long coats, the sun glinting off the rifles strapped to their saddles. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "That's them!" Elias didn't move from his place. He let the men come, closer, their horses kicking up dust as they reined in a short distance from the cabin. The leader, a thick-shouldered man with a scar running down his cheek, spurred his horse forward a few paces. He grinned, though the expression carried no warmth. "Mornin', Turner," he called. "Fine day to hand over what don't belong to you." Elias stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. He kept his voice steady, though the muscles in his jaw worked tight. "The girl don't belong to you, Maddox. She's under my protection now." The man's grin widened, ugly and mocking. "You think you can keep her? Ain't no law out here says you can. Only strength. And there's 3 of us, 1 of you. Best step aside." Elias didn't blink. "You ride on now. You won't get another warning." Behind him, Clara stood just inside the doorway, her face pale, but her eyes fixed on the Maddox brothers. The scarred man spat in the dirt. "Have it your way." He gave a sharp whistle, and the other 2 men began to circle, their horses wide, forming a half-ring around the cabin. Elias raised his rifle, the weight of it steady in his hands. The first shot cracked the morning air. A bullet splintered the porch post inches from Elias's shoulder. Clara screamed. Elias dropped to one knee and fired back, his shot grazing one rider's arm and sending the man swearing as he reeled in his saddle. The battle had begun. Inside the cabin, Clara clutched the pistol Elias had shown her hands trembling violently. Every instinct told her to hide, but she knew. If Elias fell, she and Hannah would be lost. She pressed herself against the doorway, heart pounding, praying with every shot that he would not be taken from her too. The Maddox brothers wheeled, their horses, gunfire ringing sharp and cruel across the plain. Elias moved with the precision of a man who had lived too long by the gun, his shots measured, never wasted. But there were 3 of them, and only 1 of him, and Clara could see the odds stacking higher with every passing second. She thought of Hannah, lying weak with fever. She thought of the long nights of fear and hunger, and the way Elias had opened his door when no one else would. Her fear twisted into something fiercer. Her hands steadied. She lifted the pistol, aimed at the rider bearing down on Elias from the side, and squeezed the trigger. The gun roared in her grip. The rider jerked in his saddle, his horse rearing wildly. He toppled backward into the dust. Elias spun at the sound, his eyes widening as he saw Clara standing in the doorway, the pistol smoking in her hands. For a heartbeat, shock held him still. Then the scarred Maddox brother roared with rage and charged straight at the cabin, gun blazing. Elias barely had time to shout Clara's name before the world erupted in gunfire and chaos. The roar of gunfire split the air, louder than thunder rolling over the plains. Bullets chewed into the cabin's walls, wood splintering in sharp bursts. Clara cried out, ducking low as shards rained around her. Elias moved like a man shaped by battle, quick, sure, his rifle steady. He fired back at the charging Maddox brother, the shot striking the man's horse in the flank. The animal screamed, rearing high. The rider toppled hard to the ground, his gun skidding into the dirt. Clara crawled back toward the hearth, heart hammering, clutching the pistol close to her chest. Smoke stung her eyes, and her ears rang with the thunder of shots. Through the doorway, she caught a glimpse of Elias, his broad frame braced, his jaw tight, every inch of him carved from resolve. The scarred brother was on his feet again, spitting curses, blood streaking his face where the fall had torn his cheek. "You're a dead man, Turner!" he bellowed. Elias said nothing. He leveled the rifle and squeezed. The shot struck the man's shoulder, spinning him around. The last of the three brothers pressed his horse hard, circling wide, trying to flank the cabin. Elias cursed under his breath, firing but missing by a hair. The rider returned fire, a bullet slamming into the porch beam with a sharp crack. Elias ducked back inside, pulling Clara close with one arm. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough. She nodded shakily, though her breath came in gasps. "I shot one. I didn't mean to." "You meant to stay alive," Elias said firmly. "That's enough." The pounding of hooves circled outside. Elias glanced toward the small back window, gauging. His ammunition was running thin. He knew the Maddox brothers wouldn't quit until they'd either taken Clara or left bodies in the dirt. He pressed a hand on her shoulder. "Stay here. Keep that pistol close. Don't shoot unless you have to." Clara grabbed his sleeve, eyes wide with panic. "Don't go out there, you'll be killed." Elias held her gaze. "Better me than you. Lock the door behind me." Before she could protest again, he slipped out the back, silent as a shadow. Clara's breath came ragged. She bolted the door, her fingers shaking. Every creak of the boards, every echo of hooves outside set her nerves aflame. She thought of Hannah, weak, fevered, waiting for her to return. If Elias fell, there would be no one left to protect them. Outside, Elias crept along the cabin wall, his rifle ready. He could hear the wounded Maddox brother groaning in the dirt, the scarred one barking orders. The third circled wide on horseback, searching for an opening. Elias's mind worked fast. He'd seen enough standoffs to know how they ended. The Maddox brothers weren't the sort to cut losses. They'd rather die than let pride be bested. He set his jaw. If it came to it, he'd see to it they didn't leave this land alive. The circling rider thundered past. Elias stepped out from cover, aimed, and fired. The shot caught the man square in the thigh. He screamed, tumbling from the saddle. His horse bolted, hooves tearing into the earth as it vanished over the rise. "Damn. You, Turner!" the scarred brother roared. He hauled his wounded kin to his feet, fury twisting his features. "You think you can steal what's ours? We'll burn this cabin to the ground if we have to." Elias raised his rifle again. "You try, and you won't live to see the smoke." The two men glared at him, their breaths ragged, blood streaking their coats. For a long, tense moment, the prairie held still. Then, with a curse spat deep from his chest, the scarred man hauled his brother onto a horse. "This ain't over, Turner," he bellowed, his voice cracking through the wide silence. "You hear me? You've just signed your death warrant. We'll be back, and we'll bring more with us." Elias didn't lower his rifle until the brothers had vanished into the horizon. Their curses carried faint on the wind. Only then did he let out a long, heavy breath. His hands, though steady, ached from gripping the rifle too hard. He turned and stepped back into the cabin. Clara was crouched by the fire, clutching the pistol, her face streaked with tears. When she saw him, she let out a sob and rushed forward, grasping his arm as though to prove he was real. "They're gone?" she whispered. "For now," Elias said, his voice grim. "But they'll be back." Clara's strength gave out, and she sank into the chair by the hearth, trembling. Elias crouched beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You did well," he said softly. Her eyes lifted to his, wide with fear and disbelief. "I killed a man," she whispered. "You saved a life," Elias corrected. "Mine. And your sister's. Don't ever forget that." She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with quiet sobs. Elias remained there, silent, his hand steady against her shoulder. The day dragged on heavy. Elias boarded up the bullet holes in the cabin walls, though he knew it would do little if the brothers returned in force. Clara helped where she could, but her hands shook, and her eyes often drifted toward the horizon, watching for riders. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Elias saddled his horse. Clara stepped outside, her face pale. "You're leaving?" she asked, panic in her voice. "Only to fetch your sister," Elias said. "She won't last long alone." "Where is she?" Clara pressed a hand to her mouth. "I left her in a shed, behind the mercantile. I thought it'd be safe for a night. I had no choice." Elias nodded. "Then we'll bring her here." Clara's knees nearly buckled with relief. She mounted behind him, clutching his coat tight as they rode hard toward town. The chill evening air bit against their faces, the horizon painted in fading gold. When they reached the shed, Clara leapt, down first, fumbling with the latch. Inside, Hannah lay curled on a thin blanket, her face flushed with fever, her breaths shallow. Clara knelt beside her, brushing her hair back, tears slipping down her cheeks. "She's burning up," she whispered. Elias crouched low, his face grim. He gathered the frail girl into his arms, careful as though lifting glass. "We'll get her warm," he said, "and we'll get her through this." The ride back was slow, Elias cradling Hannah against him, Clara riding close. When they reached the cabin, Clara helped settle her sister into the cot by the fire. Elias brewed willow bark tea, coaxing a little between Hannah's lips, though much spilled down her chin. Clara sat by her side through the night, singing softly, her voice raw but tender. Elias kept the fire high and his rifle closer. Sleep did not touch him. Near dawn, as pale light crept through the cracks, Hannah stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Clara gasped, pressing her forehead against her sister's. "You'll be all right," she whispered. "We're safe now." But Elias's gaze stayed on the horizon. He knew better. Safety was a fragile thing in the West. When Clara finally rose, her face hollow with exhaustion, she looked at Elias. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "Why risk your life for us? You don't even know me." Elias's eyes met. Hers shadowed by memories he had long buried. For a moment he said nothing. Then, in a low voice, he answered, "Because once, someone risked theirs for me, and I wasn't there to return it." The weight of his words lingered between them. Clara searched his face, seeing for the first time the grief etched deep in the lines around his eyes. Before she could speak, the distant sound of horses broke the morning stillness. Clara froze, her hand flying to her mouth. Elias moved to the window, rifle in hand. On the ridge, dark figures gathered, more than 3 this time. 6, maybe 7 riders, their shapes stark against the rising sun. The Maddox brothers had returned. And they hadn't come alone. Elias's grip tightened on the rifle. Behind him, Clara's trembling voice broke the silence. "They'll kill us all." Elias turned, his face grim but unyielding. "Not if I've got breath in me." The riders began their slow descent toward the cabin, the earth trembling under their hooves. Elias stepped onto the porch, the weight of his past and his present, pressing down like the sky itself. This fight, he knew, would decide everything. The morning sun rose cold and pale over the prairie, casting long shadows across the cabin. Elias Turner stood on the porch, rifle in hand, his breath misting in the chill air. Beyond the ridge, 7 riders descended slow and steady, their figures dark against the pale light. The Maddox brothers had returned, and they had brought their pack with them. Inside, Clara knelt beside Hannah, who lay restless under the quilts, her skin clammy from fever. Clara's heart thudded like a drum as she listened to the hoofbeats growing louder. She looked once at the door, then at her frail sister, and whispered a prayer. Elias's voice carried through the crack in the door, steady and low. "Clara, bar the windows. Keep her low. And if anyone makes it inside, you fight." Her hands trembled as she dragged a chair under the window, pressing it tight against the frame. She wanted to call out, "Don't go out there. Stay with us. Don't leave me." But the words lodged in her throat. Something in the set of Elias's shoulders told her this was a stand he meant to take, no matter the cost. The riders reined in their horses a short distance from the cabin. Dust rose around them, the morning wind carrying the creak of leather and the faint jingle of spurs. The scarred Maddox brother urged his horse forward, his sneer twisting his ruined cheek. "You should have handed her over, Turner," he called, his voice loud and cruel. "Would have saved you the pain." Elias raised the rifle. "I told you once, she's not yours." The Maddox brother laughed, throwing his head back. "Hear that, boys? He thinks he can keep her. 1 man against 7. The others jeered, but there was a note of caution under the mockery. They had seen Elias's aim the day before. You've got one chance, Elias said, his voice carrying across the wide silence. Turn your horses. Leave this land. You won't get another warning. The scarred brother spat into the dirt. We ain't leaving without her. He drew his revolver in one smooth motion. The crack of gunfire split the air. Elias dove behind a beam, the bullet splintering wood inches from his head. He returned fire in the same breath, his shot grazing the man's arm. Chaos erupted. The riders fanned out, guns blazing, their shouts ringing against the sky. Bullets thudded into the cabin walls. Clara ducked low, pulling Hannah to the floor, as splinters showered around them. Elias! Clara cried, but her voice was drowned out by the thunder of gunfire. On the porch, Elias fought with the grim focus of a man who had nothing left to lose. He dropped one rider clean from his saddle, the man's body thudding heavy to the ground. Another circled wide, firing wild into the windows. Elias turned and shot, the horse rearing as its rider tumbled into the dust. But the odds were steep. His ammunition ran low, and the riders pressed harder, circling like wolves. One of them dismounted, creeping toward the cabin's back door. Clara saw his shadow through the crack in the shutters. Her heart hammered. She glanced at Hannah, too weak to move, then at the pistol lying near the hearth. She snatched it up, her palms slick with sweat. The door creaked. A heavy boot pressed it open. Clara fired. The man staggered back, cursing, clutching his bleeding leg. She fired again and he fled, crawling toward his horse. Her hands shook violently, but her eyes blazed with fierce determination. Good girl, Elias muttered under his breath when he heard the shot, though he didn't dare take his eyes from the men outside. The scarred Maddox brother bellowed in fury. Enough of this! Burn it down! Two of the riders leapt from their saddles, pulling oil-soaked rags from their packs. Clara's stomach turned to ice as she watched them slosh liquid along the porch beams. Elias swore under his breath, firing quick to scatter them. One dropped, clutching his chest. The other managed to light a match, flames licking upward as he tossed it against the beam. Fire caught fast, crackling hungry as it climbed the dry wood. Clara screamed. Smoke curled inside, stinging her throat. Hannah coughed weakly, her face pale as ash. Elias turned, his eyes blazing. He saw Clara through the haze, clutching Hannah, terror plain on her face. In that instant, a memory struck him sharp. His wife, his little girl, fire licking at their home, his own helplessness as sickness claimed them. He had sworn never again. Not again. With a roar, Elias charged from cover, his rifle swinging like a club. He struck one man square across the jaw, sending him sprawling. The scarred brother wheeled his horse, revolver raised. Turner, he snarled. This ends now. The shot rang. Elias staggered, the impact slamming into his shoulder. He dropped to one knee, teeth clenched against the pain. Clara's scream pierced the smoke. She scrambled to the doorway, pistol in hand, tears streaming down her face. No! She cried. The scarred brother aimed again, grinning through his bloodied teeth. But before he could fire, Clara's shot cracked across the yard. The bullet struck true, tearing into his chest. His grin froze, eyes wide with shock. He toppled from the saddle, landing hard in the dirt. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of fire. The remaining riders, stunned at the sight of their leader fallen, exchanged uneasy glances. Without the scarred brother driving them, their courage wavered. One by one they turned their horses, galloping hard across the plain, leaving their dead behind. Clara dropped the pistol, her body shaking as sobs tore from her chest. She ran to Elias, who still knelt in the dirt, blood seeping from his shoulder. "You're hurt," she choked, pressing her hands against the wound. Elias's breath came ragged, but his eyes held steady on her face. "You saved me," he rasped. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks. "I couldn't let them take you. I couldn't." He reached up with his uninjured hand, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch rough but gentle. "You've got more fight in you than you know, Clara Bennett." Together they staggered back into the cabin, smoke still curling from the porch beams. Clara doused the flames with water from the barrel, coughing through the haze. Inside, Hannah, lay trembling but alive, her fever breaking under the weight of the night's storm. Elias slumped into the chair by the fire, his face pale with pain. Clara knelt beside him, binding his wound with strips of cloth, her hands tender despite their trembling. "Why did you do it?" she whispered. "Why risk everything for me?" Elias's gaze lingered on the fire, shadows deep in his eyes. After a long silence, he spoke. "Because I couldn't save the ones I loved before. My wife, my little girl. I buried them both. Thought my heart died with them. But you reminded me there's still something worth standing for. Worth fighting for." Clara's breath caught, her tears falling anew. She laid her hand gently over his. "And you reminded me that not all men are like them. That kindness still lives in this world." The cabin grew quiet, save for the crackle of the fire and Hannah's soft breathing. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and still, the threat gone at last. As dawn broke fully, painting the horizon gold, Clara rested her head lightly against Elias's shoulder. He winced at the wound, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he let the warmth of her presence settle into the place where loneliness had long dwelt. They had no promises, no clear road ahead. The Maddox clan might rise again, troubles would surely come. But in that moment, 3 souls gathered around a fragile flame. They had found something the harsh West rarely gave. Hope, and in the quiet of the prairie morning, Elias Turner, the quiet cowboy who had lived too long in shadows, felt the first stirrings of belonging return to his weary heart.